Have you ever stopped to think about why you react a certain way without even intending to? This is one of the most powerful questions we can ask ourselves as we begin the journey towards self-awareness. In this video, we will explore a concept that lies at the core of our automatic reactions and our identities: the ego. The ego is the part of us that is mostly unconscious. It's the mask we wear every day to interact with the world, to protect ourselves, to define ourselves. But what many don't realize is that by identifying with the ego, we are moving further away from our deepest essence, from our true nature. Imagine you're wearing a mask all the time. The mask becomes so much a part of you that you forget it's not really your face. What happens when we react to a critique, a disagreement, or a situation that challenges us? Instead of being authentic and responsible, our ego takes control, and we react automatically, as though our identity is at stake. This is just one example of how the ego controls our actions without us even realizing it. Sometimes the ego makes us feel insecure or valuable, depending on the situation. But what's really happening is that we are being controlled by something that isn't truly us. The ego is not you or me. It's a mental construct we've created throughout our lives, influenced by experiences, beliefs, and the way the world perceives us. Throughout this video, I invite you to reflect on how the ego shows up in your life. Have you noticed how many times you make decisions based on what others think, or out of fear of losing something important to your identity? To understand the ego more deeply, we need to explore where it comes from and how it forms. The ego is not something we are born with. It is a construct built over time, piece by piece, through our interactions with the world. The ego is the collection of beliefs, experiences, and identities we create to protect ourselves and define who we are. From the moment we are born, we begin to absorb information from our environment, our parents, our culture, our peers. These influences help shape our view of ourselves and the world. But here's the catch: much of what we believe about ourselves is not our true essence. It's just a story we tell ourselves to make sense of who we are in relation to others. Think about how a child starts to form their identity. They begin by recognizing themselves as separate from their parents and others around them. As they grow, they start to label themselves. I am a student, I am a good friend, I am an athlete. These labels start to stick, and over time we begin to identify with them. But what if these labels are not really you at all? What if they are just roles you've learned to play? We start to identify with these labels. This is the ego in action. The ego is made up of all these labels and roles. It's how we see ourselves in relation to others, but it's not the whole picture. The ego convinces us that we are our achievements, our status, our successes, and even our failures. And the problem is, when we identify too much with the ego, we forget who we truly are beneath all the labels. Take a moment and reflect on this. What labels do you identify with the most? Are you the successful professional, the caring parent, the popular friend? While these labels can be useful in some ways, they are not the complete definition of who you are. The true you is much more than any label the ego could place on you. At some point, we stop seeing these labels as something we wear and begin to believe they are who we truly are. This is where the ego takes full control. It starts to tell us that if we lose these labels, we will lose ourselves. This attachment to the ego can become problematic when our sense of self-worth is tied to external validation. For example, we might believe that if we lose our job, we lose our value. Or if we're not seen as successful by others, we feel like we've failed. But the reality is we are not defined by what we do or what others think of us. As we go further into this video, I want you to begin challenging these beliefs. Start questioning, is this who I truly am? Or is this just a role I've been playing for too long? The ego thrives on these roles because they give it a sense of stability. But in truth, these roles are nothing more than a performance that can be set aside once we start to recognize the truth about who we really are. Now that we've explored what the ego is and how it forms, it's time to dive deeper into how the ego controls our daily actions, thoughts, and reactions. The ego doesn't just sit passively in our minds. It actively shapes how we think, feel, and behave. It constantly tries to protect us, but in doing so, it often creates unnecessary conflicts, misunderstandings, and barriers between who we are and who we think we should be. The ego is like a puppeteer, pulling the strings of our behavior, often without us realizing it. Think about a time when someone said something critical about you. What happened inside you? Did you feel defensive? Did you try to justify yourself? Perhaps even going on the attack? This is the ego in action. When we feel criticized or challenged, the ego's first instinct is to protect itself. It reacts, and often the reaction is disproportionate to the situation. This happens because the ego feels that its very existence is being threatened. Here's an example. Imagine you're in a meeting at work and someone questions your idea. Instead of calmly explaining your reasoning, you immediately feel anger or frustration rising. You might feel the need to defend yourself or dismiss their critique entirely. What you're experiencing is the ego being triggered. It wants to protect your identity as someone who is always right, or someone whose ideas are valued. The same thing happens in personal relationships. When someone close to us criticizes us, the ego may react with defensiveness, withdrawal, or even anger. The deeper the attachment to our identity, the stronger the ego's reaction. But the problem with this reaction is that it's automatic. The ego doesn't give us the time to pause and reflect. Instead, it pushes us into automatic responses, often without considering whether these responses are truly aligned with who we are deep down. Why does this happen? Because the ego wants control. It thrives on being in charge of our thoughts and reactions. When we allow it to control our actions, we become slaves to our own mental constructs, constantly reacting instead of responding consciously. In moments like this, it's important to ask yourself, is this reaction truly mine? Or is this the ego trying to protect itself? When you can start to recognize the ego's influence, you gain the ability to step back and make more mindful choices. Let's explore a few more examples of how the ego manifests in our lives. The need for validation. We've all been there, checking social media to see how many likes or comments we get, hoping for validation. This is the ego seeking approval. It craves external validation because it's uncertain of its own worth. Example, you post something personal or creative online, and you anxiously wait to see how many people interact with it. If the response is not as expected, you feel disappointed or even upset. This is a sign that your sense of value is tied to external approval, not from within. Comparison and competition. The ego is constantly comparing itself to others. It looks at how much others have, what they've achieved, and where they are in life, and it decides whether it's better or worse. This comparison fuels feelings of inadequacy or superiority, neither of which is helpful. Example, you see a friend or colleague succeeding in an area you want to excel in, and instead of feeling happy for them, the ego makes you feel jealous or frustrated. It turns their success into a threat to your own worth. The need to be right. One of the most common ways the ego takes control is through our desire to always be right. Whether it's in a casual conversation or a heated debate, the ego doesn't want to admit mistakes or compromise because doing so would mean admitting that its identity is flawed. Example, you're having an argument with a friend or partner, and instead of listening to their point of view, you insist on proving your point. The ego doesn't want to be wrong, so it pushes you to continue arguing even when a peaceful resolution is possible. Understanding how the ego controls us is the first step in freeing ourselves from its influence. The ego wants to protect its fragile sense of self, but in doing so, it leads us into patterns of behavior that don't align with our true selves. Recognizing these patterns is the first key to breaking free. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into how the ego creates masks and why they stop us from being authentic. As we've seen, the ego thrives on control and wants to constantly protect its constructed identity. But in doing so, the ego creates something else. Masks that we wear to present ourselves to the world. These masks are false personas, built to protect us from perceived threats, or to gain acceptance and validation from others. The masks are not who we are, but the ego convinces us that they are. the mask of success, the mask of perfection, the mask of being always fine. These are just a few of the personas that the ego creates. We wear these masks without thinking, often becoming so attached to them that we start to believe they are part of our true selves. Think about how we often present ourselves to others. How many times have you put on a smile or pretended to be happy when deep down you were struggling? This is the ego trying to maintain an image that may not reflect your true feelings or identity. But why does the ego create these masks? The ego is constantly trying to protect us from feelings of vulnerability. It fears being exposed as imperfect, weak, or incomplete. To avoid this vulnerability, the ego constructs masks that shield us from showing our true selves. These masks can take many forms, including the perfectionist mask. The ego tells us that we must be flawless in every aspect of our lives, whether it's our appearance, our career, or our relationships. The perfectionist mask is designed to gain approval and avoid rejection. Example: you might spend hours preparing for a presentation or event, not because you want to, but because the ego convinces you that your worth is determined by how perfect you appear to others. The victim mask. On the opposite end, some people adopt the victim role. The ego convinces them that they are always being wronged, that life is unfair, or that they are constantly at the mercy of others' actions. This mask offers an illusion of safety because the individual does not have to take responsibility for their circumstances. Example: if something goes wrong, the victim mask might make you believe that the world is against you, and it's easier to blame external factors than to look inward and see how you may have contributed to the situation. The always fine mask. This mask is about pretending everything is okay even when it's not. The ego doesn't want to show any weakness, and so it pushes us to appear strong and unaffected by challenges, even if inside we're struggling. Example: how many times have you told someone, "I'm fine," when in fact you were not? The ego wants to maintain control over how others perceive us, so it convinces us to mask our true emotions. The always right mask. This mask is all about being seen as someone who knows best, someone who is never wrong. The ego fears that if it admits fault, it will lose its sense of importance or control. So, it pushes us to argue, defend, or even manipulate situations to prove that we are always right. Example: in conversations or debates, the always right mask makes it nearly impossible to accept differing opinions or admit mistakes. The ego fears that admitting error will make us seem weak or unworthy. The problem with these masks. The biggest issue with wearing these masks is that they disconnect us from our true selves. We become so invested in maintaining the image that the ego has created for us that we lose touch with who we are underneath the mask. We start to believe that the mask is our true identity. These masks prevent us from experiencing life authentically. We may find ourselves in relationships, jobs, or situations where we are not truly being ourselves, all in the name of fulfilling an ego-driven role. The longer we wear the mask, the harder it becomes to remember who we truly are without it. But what happens when we remove the mask? Removing the ego's masks is not easy. It requires self-awareness, vulnerability, and courage. It means embracing the parts of ourselves that we've been hiding, and accepting that it's okay to not be perfect, to not always be in control, and to not have all the answers. When we let go of the masks, we start to experience true freedom. We begin to connect with others on a deeper level, and we start living more authentically, without the constant need for approval or validation from the outside world. How to begin removing the masks. So, how can we begin to let go of the masks we've been wearing? Here are a few steps to help get started. Recognize the mask. The first step is to become aware of the mask you're wearing. Is it the perfectionist mask, the victim mask, or another persona you've been hiding behind? Pay attention to situations where you feel the need to put on a facade. Question the need for the mask. Once you've identified the mask, ask yourself, why do I feel the need to wear this mask? What am I afraid of if I take it off? What is the worst that could happen if I let my true self shine through? Embrace vulnerability. It can be scary to take off the mask and show your true self, but vulnerability is where true connection and growth happen. Start small. Be more authentic in your interactions with others, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Practice self-acceptance. The more you accept yourself as you truly are, flaws, imperfections, and all, the easier it will be to let go of the ego's masks. Practice loving yourself for who you are, not for the roles you play. As we continue, we'll explore how to identify the ego's actions in your own life and begin taking steps toward liberation from its control. Now that we've explored how the ego creates masks to protect itself, it's time to dive into a crucial topic: how to identify the ego in your daily life. The ego operates mostly in the background, influencing our thoughts, actions, and reactions without us even realizing it. Becoming aware of the ego's presence is the first step to breaking free from its influence. How do you know when the ego is in control? The ego's behavior often manifests as automatic reactions, emotional responses that feel out of proportion to the situation, and a persistent need for validation. The key to recognizing the ego is to pay attention to your thoughts, emotions, and reactions, especially when you feel triggered or upset. Here are a few common signs that the ego is in action. 1. The need for approval and validation. One of the clearest signs that the ego is active is when we seek approval from others. The ego thrives on validation. It needs to feel that others recognize and approve of us to maintain a sense of self-worth. Example: you post something on social media and find yourself obsessively checking how many likes or comments you get. If the response isn't what you hoped for, you may feel disappointed, frustrated, or even upset. This is the ego needing validation from external sources rather than relying on internal validation. Reflection. Ask yourself, why do I feel so attached to what others think of me? Why does it matter so much? 2. Comparing yourself to others. Another common way the ego shows up is through comparison. The ego constantly compares itself to others to determine if it's better or worse than someone else. This comparison feeds the ego's need to feel superior or inferior, and it distorts our sense of self-worth. Example: you see a friend or colleague achieving something you desire. Perhaps they get a promotion, have more followers on social media, or seem to have a better lifestyle. Instead of celebrating their success, the ego turns it into a threat. You may feel envious, frustrated, or inferior. Reflection. Ask yourself, why does their success make me feel threatened? What does it say about my own sense of self-worth? 3. Defensiveness and anger. The ego is highly sensitive to criticism and perceived threats. When it feels challenged or criticized, it often reacts with defensiveness or anger. These reactions are not always rational. They are an attempt by the ego to protect itself and maintain control. Example: you're in a conversation where someone disagrees with you. Instead of calmly discussing the issue, you feel a rush of anger and defensiveness. You start justifying your position forcefully or attacking the other person's viewpoint. This is the ego trying to protect its identity as someone who is always right. Reflection. Ask yourself, why do I feel the need to defend myself so fiercely? Is it because my ego feels threatened? 4. Fear of being wrong. The ego often refuses to admit when it is wrong. It wants to maintain a perfect image, so the idea of being wrong feels like a loss of control. Admitting fault or failure can be extremely uncomfortable for the ego, and it can lead to resistance, denial, or even lying. Example: during a debate or discussion, you resist admitting that your perspective might be wrong. Instead of being open to the possibility of learning, the ego digs in its heels and continues to argue, sometimes even fabricating excuses or justifications. Reflection. Ask yourself, what would it mean for me if I admitted that I was wrong? Why is it so hard for me to accept this possibility? 5. The desire to be perfect. The ego is obsessed with perfection because it associates perfection with worth. It tells us that if we don't measure up to an ideal standard, we are not good enough. This constant drive for perfection creates stress and dissatisfaction, as perfection is unattainable. Example: you spend hours or days making sure every detail is perfect, whether it's in your work, appearance, or personal projects, because you believe that only perfection will make you valuable or worthy of praise. Reflection: ask yourself, why do I feel the need to be perfect? What happens if I allow myself to be imperfect or make mistakes? 6. Constant busyness and distraction. The ego often keeps us busy and distracted to prevent us from looking inward. When we're constantly busy, we don't have time to reflect on who we truly are beyond the roles and labels the ego has created. Distraction keeps the ego's control intact, ensuring that we don't question its existence. Example: you find yourself always busy, working, socializing, consuming content, and never really taking time for stillness or introspection. The ego convinces you that staying busy is necessary to feel worthwhile, even if it leads to burnout or a lack of true fulfillment. Reflection: ask yourself, why do I feel the need to be constantly busy? What am I avoiding by staying distracted? How to begin identifying the ego. The first step to freeing yourself from the ego's control is awareness. Pay attention to how you react in different situations. When do you feel defensive, angry, or insecure? When do you seek validation or compare yourself to others? Practice observing your thoughts and emotions without judgment. Notice when the ego takes over and recognize that these reactions are not necessarily who you are. They are simply the ego's automatic response. By catching these moments, you can begin to pause before reacting, giving yourself the space to choose a more authentic response. In the next chapter, we will explore the practices and tools you can use to start releasing the ego and living more authentically. Now that we've explored how the ego controls us and how to recognize its influence, it's time to move on to the most transformative part of this journey: letting go of the ego and learning to live more authentically. The journey to release the ego is not easy. It requires conscious effort, self-awareness, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability. But the rewards are worth it: freedom, peace, and the ability to live a life true to yourself. Let's explore some powerful practices that can help you start the process of releasing the ego and reconnecting with your true essence. 1. Mindfulness. The practice of observing without judgment. One of the most effective tools for letting go of the ego is mindfulness, the practice of observing your thoughts, emotions, and actions without judgment. Mindfulness helps you see when the ego is taking control and gives you the space to choose a different response. How does mindfulness help? When you practice mindfulness, you learn to be present in the moment, rather than reacting automatically to situations based on past conditioning. You start to notice the ego's patterns, how it tries to defend itself, how it seeks validation, how it gets triggered by certain situations. Mindfulness exercise. Take a few minutes each day to sit in stillness and observe your thoughts. Notice when thoughts of judgment, comparison, or defensiveness arise. Simply observe these thoughts without getting attached to them. Recognize that these thoughts are not you, they are just the ego at play. The more you practice mindfulness, the easier it becomes to detach from the ego's grip and experience life more authentically in the present moment. 2. Self-acceptance. Embracing your imperfections. The ego thrives on perfection because it associates perfection with worth. To release the ego, you need to practice self-acceptance, embracing both your strengths and weaknesses, your successes and failures. Why is self-acceptance so powerful? When you accept yourself as you are, flaws and all, you no longer need to prove your worth to others. You let go of the need for validation, and instead you find peace in knowing that you are enough, just as you are. Self-acceptance exercise. Take a moment to reflect on your imperfections. Instead of criticizing yourself, offer compassion. Say to yourself, I accept myself completely just as I am. My worth is not dependent on perfection. Self-acceptance allows you to free yourself from the ego's need for approval, helping you live more authentically and peacefully. 3. Embracing vulnerability. Letting go of the mask. The ego's masks, such as the mask of perfection or the always fine mask, are designed to protect us from vulnerability. But vulnerability is where true growth happens. Embracing vulnerability means showing up as your true self, without the need for pretenses or masks. Why is vulnerability important? When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we open up the possibility for real connection, both with others and with ourselves. Vulnerability helps us connect to our true essence and lets go of the ego's constant need for control. Vulnerability exercise. Start by being more authentic in your interactions. Share something personal with a trusted friend or loved one. Let go of the need to appear perfect or always in control. Allow yourself to be seen for who you truly are, without the mask of the ego. Benefit. Embracing vulnerability creates deeper, more authentic relationships and allows you to live with more freedom and less fear of judgment. 4. Challenging ego-based beliefs. The ego is rooted in beliefs about who we are, what we need, and what we must do to be valued. To release the ego, you need to start challenging these beliefs and questioning whether they are truly aligned with your authentic self. How do we challenge the ego's beliefs? Start by identifying the limiting beliefs the ego has created. For example, the belief that you need to be perfect to be worthy, or that your value is based on external achievements. Then, ask yourself, is this belief truly serving me? Exercise. Write down the limiting beliefs you have about yourself and your worth. For each belief, challenge it by asking, is this belief true? Is this the whole truth about me? Replace the limiting belief with a more empowering one like, I am worthy simply because I exist. Benefit. By challenging the ego's limiting beliefs, you start to free yourself from its grip and reclaim your true self-worth, which is not tied to external validation or achievements. 5. Practicing compassion and gratitude. One of the most transformative practices for releasing the ego is compassion, for both yourself and others. The ego is often rooted in judgment, criticism, and fear, but when we practice compassion, we begin to let go of these harmful tendencies. Why is compassion so powerful? Compassion softens the ego's rigid stance and opens us up to greater connection and understanding. When we cultivate compassion for ourselves, we stop being so hard on ourselves for our imperfections. When we extend compassion to others, we release judgment and criticism, and we see people as they truly are, flawed, beautiful, and human. Compassion and gratitude exercise. Practice self-compassion by acknowledging your own struggles with kindness. Reflect on something you're grateful for each day, big or small. Extend compassion to others by listening without judgment, understanding their pain and offering kindness. Benefit. Compassion and gratitude shift our perspective from ego-driven fear and judgment to love, acceptance, and connection. This shift is the foundation of a more authentic, ego-free life. 6. Embracing the present moment. Finally, to release the ego, you need to embrace the present moment. The ego is constantly worried about the past or the future, what we've done wrong, or what we need to achieve next. But true peace comes when we focus on the now, letting go of all worries about what should be or what could have been. Why is the present moment so powerful? When we are fully present, we are connected to our true essence, unclouded by the ego's fears and judgments. The present moment is where life happens, and it is the only moment we truly have. By practicing mindfulness and presence, we disconnect from the ego's need for control and embrace the freedom of simply being. Present moment exercise. Take a few minutes each day to be fully present. Focus on your breath, the sensations in your body, and the sounds around you. Let go of any thoughts about the past or future and just be in the present. Benefit. Living in the present moment frees you from the ego's constant chatter and allows you to experience life with greater clarity, peace, and authenticity. Releasing the ego is a lifelong journey. It's not about getting rid of the ego completely, but about recognizing when it's in control and choosing to step into a more authentic, conscious way of living. As you practice these tools and begin to let go of the ego's grip, you will find that life becomes more peaceful, fulfilling, and true to who you really are. We've come to the final chapter of our journey. After diving deep into understanding the ego, recognizing its influence and learning practices to begin releasing its hold on our lives, we are now left with one key truth. Freedom lies in letting go of the ego. The ego has been a part of us for so long that it can feel like an inseparable part of our identity. But as we've seen, the ego is merely a construct, a mental and emotional pattern that shapes the way we interact with the world. It convinces us that we need to protect our sense of self through masks, labels, and constant validation. But none of this is who we truly are. Letting go of the ego is not about denying its existence. It's about recognizing its influence and choosing to live beyond it. It's about stepping into a life where we are no longer slaves to the ego's demands for perfection, validation, and control. When we release the ego, we begin to experience true freedom, the freedom to be ourselves, to live authentically, and to embrace life as it is, without the need for approval or fear of judgment. Key takeaways. The ego is not who you are. The ego is a collection of beliefs, labels, and stories we've created over time, but it's not our true essence. Our true self is beyond the ego, waiting to be discovered when we let go of the need for validation, perfection, and control. Awareness is the first step. The more you become aware of the ego's influence in your life, the easier it is to recognize its patterns and choose a different response. Practicing mindfulness and self-awareness allows you to step out of automatic reactions and start living more authentically. Releasing the ego takes time. Letting go of the ego is a process that takes time, patience, and self-compassion. It's not about being perfect, but about taking small steps each day to live in alignment with your true self. The power of vulnerability. Embracing vulnerability and self-acceptance is crucial to releasing the ego. The more you accept yourself as you are, without the need for masks or perfection, the more you will connect with your authentic self. Freedom comes from being present. The ego keeps us stuck in the past or future, but true freedom comes when we embrace the present moment. By practicing presence and mindfulness, we free ourselves from the constant chatter of the ego and experience life as it is, beautiful, imperfect, and real. You are not your ego. You are not the mask you wear or the roles you play. You are something deeper, something more expansive. When you begin to let go of the ego's control, you allow yourself to connect with your true nature, one that is peaceful, authentic, and free. So I invite you to take the first step today. Begin to observe your ego, question its influence, and practice living with more authenticity. It may not be easy at first, but each small step will bring you closer to the freedom and peace that comes with releasing the ego's grip. The journey to living authentically is a lifelong process, but it is one that brings profound peace, deep connection, and the freedom to be exactly who you are.